Today, Amira has switched roles. She is the guest, and I will be your host. I'm Marie, I'm the co director of Drip by Drip, and I will lead you through this episode today. This is already the last episode of the first season, and I'm looking forward talking to Amira about the topic today, whether human rights and feminism will save our water resources. I would like to start with the question that we ask all our guests yet. Amira, what is the most shocking fact about water that you came across?
Yeah, I would say since launching Drip by Drip 7 years ago, what I found most shocking was the fact that even though water is a human right and a universal basic need of all human beings and animals and nature alike, that it has a profound and disproportionate impact on women. So that it actually is a feminist topic, but not represented as such in the global debate. So I would say this is the one thing that struck me most and that we're trying at Drip by Drip to educate about.
Okay, great. Yeah, we're going to talk about this more a little bit later. But first, Amira, perhaps you could tell a little bit more about the fundamental right of water. When and where has it been established?
Yeah, so in 2010, the General Assembly of the United Nations made water a basic and unconditional human right, universal human right. Unfortunately, though, since it has been a General Assembly vote, it hasn't been read, or it's not being treated such as a treaty. So countries are not obliged to ratify it and to make it their own local law. So even though we consider water to be a universal basic human right, it's not been treated as such by all the member states, even though the majority of all countries, which has been 192, has voted to make water a universal human right. It hasn't been ratified in all of the local laws. So until this very day, water is a big issue globally, unfortunately. So since it has been made a resolution and voted for with a majority, though, the world basically agreed on the fact that water is a substantial need of all human beings and something that needs to be valued and something that needs to be protected. And the reasons for that are, for example, water obviously is something that all humans need for basic survival in order to function from our bodies on a biological from a biological point of view. Water is something we need in order to function as human beings. Health and hygiene, it obviously is something that can cause a lot of harm to us as human beings if we, for example, consume polluted water, or if we face a lack of water and do not get to drink enough water throughout the day. We can severely get sick, and it can cause harm to our bodies, but at the same time it can kill us, basically. Then food security and livelihood. We need water for agriculture. So everything that deals with the food we consume, or obviously the water that we consume to make our bodies run, is related to water. So it is essential, basically, for us to live. Social and economic well-being. If we do not have access to water, it is really hard for humans to economically be well off, because if, for example, you spend most of your day fetching water from a source that is not close to your own home, then obviously that time cannot be spent creating an income or generating an income for your family, for your household. So it basically prevents you from being economically well off, because you spend most of your time fetching a resource that you need in order to sustain your life. But at the same time, it prevents you from stepping out of poverty, from making sure that your children are being educated, all of these things. Then another thing, equity and dignity. Not being able to access clean water obviously bears a huge risk for men and women alike to be exploited. Human trafficking is a thing, sexual exploitation for women. Child trafficking, whenever children, for example, in rural areas of sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, are walking kilometers, like long distances, to fetch water, there's a potential risk of human traffickers finding them and just taking them with them while they're not being protected. So it bears a lot of risk also to the physical security of every human being alike if they do not have a close and nearby access to clean water. And then lastly, legal and ethical considerations. In the declaration, the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, water has been made a essential human universal right. Also, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, it has been made a part of it. So from a legal perspective and point of view, internationally, we have made water one of the biggest resources that every human being should have access to, and that should be provided fairly and equally. But unfortunately, as we see a lot in the media and the news, this is not the situation we're seeing these days, because water is considered a basic human right, but we're not giving access to it to every human being at the same time.
Thank you. So many reasons why water is so important. But at least water is one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted 2015 by the UN. And what does this Sustainable Development Goal about water entail, and exactly like what is the current status of it?
Yeah, so SDG number 6 states that every human being should have access to clean water and to clean and safe sanitation. So the idea of the global agenda, the Sustainable Agenda 2030, was to provide every human being in this world until 2030, which is in 5 years' time, provide them with access to clean water and safe sanitation, to allow them to have a dignified, safe, and healthy life. So this goal was very ambitious, and as you can imagine, we're falling short of reaching it in the next 5 years for a number of reasons. There has been a lot of progress made, as probably some of you know. Those big SDGs that we know about, the 17 SDGs, have sub-goals in order to support this process of reaching the main goal. And a few of the sub-goals for reaching SDG number 6 are actually quite progressive, or we have made a lot of progress in reaching them. Unfortunately, the overall goal, though, is still really far from being reached, and I'm very positive that we will not be able to reach it in the next 5 years. One of the reasons for that, obviously, is climate change due to a decrease in clean water resources. We have seen a lot of situations where flooding has polluted water resources that were initially clean in countries such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, just in the recent months, or let's say this year. So this has a huge impact on it, but at the same time, pollution and over-extraction by industries such as the textile industry, which is our focus area of the work that Drip by Drip does. Over-extraction and pollution with chemicals, letting effluents and like untreated wastewater of industrial use, just letting it flow back to the natural resources, polluting them, and then making no effort in preventing that other water resources that are linked to this specific river, for example, that's flowing around a factory, that are linked to them in some way or connected, that they will get polluted, and then the pollution will flow across the country and pollute all the clean resources that we have, is a huge issue, and we do not have legal frameworks to really prevent that from happening. Then a lack of sanitation services. For some reason, this goal is really far from reaching the numbers or the targets, the KPIs that were set once, because apparently sanitation is not as of a sexy topic for companies and governments alike to really work on it properly. And we see that there hasn't been made significant investment in order to really come close to reaching the targets when it comes to clean sanitation. And then inequality in water access is a huge issue. Until this very day, in many rural areas, for example, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, but also Latin America, rural areas are not being addressed properly when it comes to providing rural areas, villages with access to a water pump or a water system underground that connects them to a bigger water source or to a city. So investment is a huge lack or a huge issue why those goals are not being met. But at the same time, from our experience as Drip by Drip, what's the biggest issue with regard to reaching SDG number 6 is that there are way too little SMIs meaning multi-stakeholder initiatives. So what we've seen is that the most successful initiative you can have in order to provide access to water and sanitation, healthy and clean and safe sanitation, is if as many stakeholders as possible who are somewhat related to the topic come and work together. That being said, governments making or providing the legal frameworks and maybe providing some sort of a funding, companies who can do the plumbing work, working together with the governments, and then community leaders making sure that the sort of solution in order to provide clean water meets the needs of the community and considers the ecological and economical situation of the respective community. And then NGOs who can actually assess from a neutral point of view whether that solution is the right solution and whether there has been corruption in the way. All of these things, then the inclusion of female leadership, making sure that women are part of the table, who take the final decisions about where a well has been or is supposed to be built and how it's supposed to be built, to make sure that the majority of the people who are going to use the water source throughout the day, which are women who are the caregivers, so being home with the elderly or with the children, have proper access to the source. So all of that has not been done properly in the last years since the SDGs were put in place. And we see that still 10% of the global population, meaning almost 800 million people, lack access to clean water, with a water demand that is going to rise by 20-30% until 2050. So the demand for clean water is going to rise, but at the same time, we're not providing enough people with access to it. And we're not doing enough in order to clean it or keep the resource clean and usable for humans. So I would say that those are huge issues. And then obviously a financing gap, as I said before. We know that it would take $114 billion in order to completely solve the water issues in the world, which is an amount of money that could easily be provided if governments would work together. And then obviously we had taxes, like proper tax systems in order to fund those measures. So yeah, unfortunately, we're still really close or really far from reaching the goal, but I think we're still, still a lot of effort needs to be done in order to really, make this happen.
Yeah, I see. Like with the crisis, the water crisis, like coming closer to also European homes, I hope that in the next years there's going to be a big push into the water sector and water investments. And when we're coming back, you already mentioned that, like when you just talked, but also initially, in what ways does water have a special impact on women?
Yeah, that's actually many ways that I had to learn also. Let's start by saying that time poverty is a huge issue for women. I mentioned it before. Women are the main caregivers globally, and women are mainly responsible for fetching water. So they walk for hours in order to fetch water, to bring it home to their households. Then it needs to be cooked in order for it to be clean. And then the whole process of washing, the whole process of cleaning starts, cooking, obviously. So time is a huge issue. In Sub-Saharan Africa, women and girls spend on average 200 million hours per day collecting water, but obviously collectively in Sub-Saharan Africa. So this is time that women cannot spend creating or generating an income for the household. And it's also time that girls cannot attend school and get an education. So this is a huge issue. Then obviously physical burden, carrying heavy loads of water for kilometers each day is really harmful for the physical condition of the women. Let's talk about back pain, and then also other severe injuries that can occur throughout on the way of going back and forth from their household to the water source, carrying their babies on top of the water. So physical burden is a huge issue. Then waterborne diseases. Women, as the caregivers, obviously are more in touch with water sources, unclean water sources, but also with unhealthy children and elderly. So if there's no real opportunity to remain clean, to wash their hands properly, to wash the cooking instruments, to wash the clothes, the risk for infection is huge. So also in terms of this physical aspect, women are more at risk. Menstrual hygiene is a huge issue and something that Drip by Drip is more and more working on. The fact that women cannot properly and safely manage their menstruation if they do not have access to clean water is a huge issue, because obviously there's a huge risk for infections. And then childbirth, you need clean water in order to give birth to a child. The risk for the children of getting infections in the very early days of their life on Earth is really dependent on clean water. Breastfeeding. So, I mean, everything that women deal with in order to reproduce, in order to have children, in order to make sure that they can properly grow, depends on clean water. Then maternal health, I already mentioned that. School attendance, I mentioned it. Educational inequality, I said that that girls are not really being able to go to school. Agriculture and livelihoods. If you do not have access to clean water and your main income source is to produce agricultural products, then obviously the growth of your produce will not be properly, so your income will decrease. So also from an economical perspective, it is very important, especially for farming families, for rural households, to have access to water. So income opportunities obviously differ widely from households who have access to water and who do not. And then I mentioned that before, vulnerability. If women do not have access to water, but they need water in order to provide it to their children and their families, it obviously makes them exploitative, or they are more of an easy target for human traffickers for sexual exploitation. Rebecca Sands from Water Integrity Network, who I've talked to in the last episode, mentioned that there is an increase of sexual assault on women when they address basically men who are able to decide about water sources. And they address them in order to have access to the water resources. And then the men exploit them and say, you can have water, but then at the same time, I want you to give me something back. So it's a high risk of being assaulted, and a high risk for the women to also survive. I mean, anything can happen while they're alone on their way to fetch water. So then decision-making power. Women are not part of the table generally or universally in the world to make decisions about where water access will be implemented and if it's really sustainable and if it's really accessible for them. And then I mentioned it before, climate change is a huge issue, and climate migration causes a specific risk for women. Because if they need to change their location and move to a different city or even move to a different country because in their local area they do not have access to water on the way of migrating, there's a huge risk for women always for sexual exploitation, which is obviously a bit lower for men. And then for children, the same. Children can sexually be exploited. Children can be trafficked. So for women in general and children, the risks in life generally are much higher when they are not being provided with access to clean water and sanitation. So I think generally we need to understand that it is a feminist issue, and we can never address any water issue globally without looking at it from a gender perspective.
Thank you, Amira. If we now look on the bright side of this issue, like when we address water issues, how does the empowerment look like for women then?
Yeah, so what we see from our projects and also the projects that our partner organizations in the Global South run is that it has an incredible change on women's lives. The health factor is the first thing that changes. When they feel more healthy, they obviously can attend work more often in whatever sort of a work situation they're in, which means they automatically rise the income of their households. That also means that children can attend school more regularly, because if the women have more income, they can provide them with all necessities or things that they need in order to attend school, such as school uniforms, books, pens, literally everything, transportation to the school. So it has another really important impact on the educational level of the children. And then it obviously empowers the women in the decision-making processes of the household, because if the woman provides the household with a significant amount of income, then she has more leverage in order to take decisions that are based on the situation of their families, and they are less likely of being under pressure by the husband or other male family members who might not have the best interest of the children and the family in their mind at all points in time. So it empowers them also in terms of safety and security, knowing that they have access to clean water and they do not have to fetch and they do not have to beg anybody for water for their family and for their children. Allows them to feel more secure. They're less of a target for exploitation, and sexual assault. So in literally all spheres of their life, women are being empowered when they have access to clean water, free access and close access. So not access where they have to take long routes in order to gain the access, but actual access close to their households. All of that has a huge positive impact on the women, but also the complete family of her, the household, and the community. So it has a triple or even bigger impact on everybody that's surrounding the woman.
Yeah, so now we understood more about the connection between water and women. And Drip by Drip is working with the global fashion and textile industry. So how does it come into play here?
Yeah, so the global fashion and textile industry, as many probably know, depends highly on manual labor from women. 85% globally of the textile workforce are women, and it starts by cultivating and also collecting cotton from the fields. So harvesting the cotton. I've been to Pakistan myself on a cotton field, and the women mainly walk throughout the field and collect the cotton from the actual plants. And the reason behind that the men of the community gave me is that the women and the children have smaller hands. So for them, it's actually easier to grab into the plant and extract the cotton from it. So it is mainly done by women. And then in the RGM sector or the manufacturing, the stitching, all of that is mainly in the Global South done by women, because it's considered to be a female kind of task. Sewing and all these things are considered female tasks. So this is a work that women mainly do. So this whole sector depends highly on women. But at the same time, it is not addressing the special needs of those women, making this whole industry run. Because they're like hardly in any of the countries that are really like the big production hubs or that house the big production hubs of the global textile and fashion industry, really focus on gender aspects of this like industrial complex. So sanitation facilities, even though they might be put into law, and so that's basically making it binding for factory owners to provide the workers with separate washrooms, which is the case in Bangladesh, for example, is not something that's being actually enforced in many of the factories, because there is not enough there are not enough mechanisms and processes in order to investigate whether it has been implemented, and the fees or the fines are very low. So it economically, it doesn't really make sense for factory owners to provide the workforce with separate washrooms. So during the menstruation, it is really hard for women to attend work or to come to work, because changing sanitary napkins or being able to just go to the toilet is really, really made difficult for them. And then it is also put into law in Bangladesh, for example, that if a factory needs to provide a childcare center. But from what we've learned from our partners in Bangladesh is that the rooms are there. So whenever someone comes to investigate whether the law has been enforced, the room is there, but no qualified staff is actually working there that's teaching the children or just taking care of them. So the risk of the children being harmed or hurt by unprofessional staff taking care of them throughout the day is really high. So the women will not send their children to the childcare center, which also means when the children are sick, they might not be able to work and lose income. So this whole fashion industry depends highly on women, but is not addressing their specific needs. So it is a huge issue that needs to be solved.
Yeah, let's talk about Drip's projects in this field and how the impact of the projects looks like how is it created, what it is creating.
So what Drip by Drip started with, where in Bangladesh we implemented through our local partner, Agroho, we implemented water filters. So we initially focused on just providing the communities of the textile workers that are living like surrounding the big textile and fashion hubs, providing them with access to clean water free and 24/7 through a tap. Then at some point, it turned out that deep tube wells were the more promising and the more impactful solution. So we are doing more of deep tube wells now, because the groundwater is much cleaner than the surface water that can be filtered through the filters. So this is one aspect that we're focusing on. But then we run to mobile hospitals, for example, because waterborne diseases have created already like severe infections for men and women alike in the communities that live surrounding the factories. But they do not have access to healthcare, because the healthcare facilities are usually located in the bigger cities. So if you do not have the means of transportation to go there, or you don't have the funds or the financial means to buy into it, a means of transportation to get to a doctor, you would just not have any access to healthcare. So our mobile hospitals basically target those specific or service those specific regions and provide free and good healthcare to the people of those communities, of those textile worker communities. And then something we do in Pakistan specifically is a project called Wash for Schools, where we do provide schools with wash facilities and water filters, because children are always like one of the biggest beneficiary groups that you can address, because any positive impact on the children will also impact or have a positive impact on their families and on their communities. So this is another thing we do. And last but not least, as I mentioned before, we are more and more working on gender aspects of water and the lack of water. So we are currently focusing a lot on MHM projects in factories in Bangladesh. This is where we started, where we provide free sanitary napkins and hygiene kits to the workers. But at the same time, there is a lot of workshop planning going on, addressing the leadership of the factories to make them understand that they need to provide their mainly female workforce with sanitation and water access. And then at the same time, trying to lower the stigma of women talking about issues that are related to the menstruation by addressing the community elders and the leaders of the communities, and try to make everybody understand kind of that those women are having a natural process once a month, and that their needs need to be addressed universally by the community, by the families, by the workplace. These are the things that we do in order to try to address those issues. And from our 7-year experience, these are very promising and very impactful solutions to those issues I've mentioned before.
Our time is slowly running out, and I would love to come to the final question. So what is a fact about water and the reality of textile workers that we haven't mentioned yet, but you want everybody to know?
So, since I've asked that question many times before, I obviously prepared for it because I knew it was coming. But no, actually, just last week I had I was part of a very interesting panel discussion organized by another German NGO called Femnet, where I introduced our MHM project in Bangladesh, and another panelist was a member of the Indian NGO CVDEP, who will probably also be a guest on our podcast season 2. And she shared that from a gender project they have run the last year, they learned that in India, women or female textile workers as young as 30 years are having surgeries that they choose to have, extracting their uteruses, because it is so hard for them to work and create an income during the week of their menstruation each month, that they prefer to have their uterus extracted from their bodies at a really young age in order to not have menstruation again, and in order to be able to fully work and create the income they need in order to sustain their families and their households. So I found this really shocking, because in the 7 years I've been working in this field, I have not come across that fact before. And I find it especially shocking because the women obviously do not have access to proper information before deciding to do that surgery. And they use a lot of financial means that they could spend otherwise in order to fund or to finance the surgery. And in the end, what happens is that their bodies obviously are not ready to be in menopause. So they have lots of physical issues which might harm their ability to work even more, because the surgery is something that's coming way too early, and something that is often not done properly. So the risk for future infections, for more severe like illnesses, and a state of them being unable to work at all is very likely to happen. So they think they are basically creating a situation in which they can create more income, but in the end they might even make it worse for them. And obviously those information are not being shared with them beforehand. So I thought that this was really shocking, that we're at a stage where this happens and it is obviously known and still not being addressed in the industry. So I think this is something that especially feminists in the global south who consider themselves being feminists should consider when making their purchasing decisions or talking about feminism a bit more.
This is an absolute unbelievable reality, unfortunately. And yeah, the whole system is very sick and it really needs to be changed. And I feel like on my path with Drip by Drip, I met a lot of change makers who gave me hope that someone there's going to be change. But enough for today. But not enough of our podcast. Like soon there's coming more, our second season of the podcast, of the video podcast, and we will look into the specific cases of the main production countries in the global south of the textile and fashion industry, such as Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, and Nepal, and hear a lot of very interesting voices of the global south. And thank you so much, Amira. It's always a big pleasure to talk to you. And thank you out there for listening, and follow us on social media, and have a great day.
Thank you for hosting.